I'm just going to click the live button,
No,
and we should be live soon. I like that cloth that you're wearing, which is
the
different.
shawl.
Yes. Ah, is it for decoration or for warmth?
It's not. So I know a lot of people different. A lot of different cultures use it for different things. It's for everything. So I'll turn it into a bag if I'm out, a seat if I'm out, prayer rug if I'm out, and also it does look good.
It
So
does.
all
It
of these
does.
things.
Yes. Is it from a particular Muslim country? The
Uh,
shawl?
well, the ones that use it most are in Yemen, the Yemenis and the Southeast Asians, particularly Indo-Pak, the Indians and the Pakistanis. They're the
Mhm.
ones that use it most. But you'll find traces of it all around the Muslim world.
Ah, so is it wool or cotton
I
or
have I have wool ones. This particular one is cotton.
uh-huh, uh-huh. It's very handsome. I do like it.
Thank you.
Very, very nice. Yes, the lovely color. And today we are talking about Sharia. You will be explaining um, perhaps you will explain how it might work in America, I suppose, because all these people will have preconceived ideas of how it's going to cut their heads and hands off and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk about what is the Sharia, because we have several different misunderstandings of what the Sharia is, and we do have people who they focus on the cutting of hands, the stoning of the adulterer, these types of things, and then you also have people who, they perceive it as something. What can we say that is uh, what's
Cruel and unusual punishment.
yeah, we can say that. We can say that. And so there's a lot of misunderstandings about the Sharia. And I think that one of the very first things to establish, even before we talk about the Sharia, because it's my belief, it's my personal belief that the only way to actually have real freedom is through the Sharia. You cannot have freedom except through the Sharia. That's my own personal opinion. And so I think that where I'd like to begin, if it's okay with you, is to discuss what is freedom. What is freedom?
Hmm.
And so, especially here in America, this is a catchphrase, it's a slogan, but most people have no real understanding of what freedom is, what the connotations are. And so, if I was to ask 20 different people around the world, but specifically here in America, what is freedom? Most of them could not give a coherent answer. Most of them. They would probably smile, giggle a little bit, and try to explain what they heard from somebody else or something like this, or just come off the top of their head. And honestly, most people, when they talk about freedom, what they immediately want to talk about is you can do whatever you want. Freedom means you can do whatever you want. But the fact of the matter is that's not freedom. That's not freedom. That's literally the law of the jungle. That's survival of the fittest. Because if everybody can do what they want, then those that are stronger can oppress the weak. Those that are richer can manipulate the poor. Those who are
Hmm.
smarter can take advantage of those who aren't as intelligent. And so you have those who band together and form networks, uh, taking over and really oppressing everyone else. And so, in this
It would be
way,
the law of the jungle.
exactly. So, what most people understand as freedom is nothing more than the law of the jungle, right? By definition, it's the law. I can do whatever I want. No, that's the law of the jungle. And so, when you explain this to them, then they automatically will give a nuance. And I appreciate the nuance. And that nuance is that you can do whatever you want as long as you don't infringe upon the ability of others to do what they want, right?
Mhm.
But that's not freedom either. It sounds like freedom, but we have another term for that. And that's the definition of anarchy. That's what anarchy is. Anarchy is that everybody can do whatever they want as long as they don't infringe upon the rights of other people to do what they want, right? And that's literally the definition of anarchy. And so in this way, they mistake freedom. They say they want freedom, but they don't. They want anarchy. Now, freedom, my definition of freedom was informed by UC Berkeley professor Daniel Kofi, and he taught this in a rhetoric class back maybe in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. He taught this in a class on rhetoric. And he said, and since I heard it from him, it's been my working definition. I have never changed my definition of freedom. I have never found a better definition. Freedom is the ability, this is the actual definition of freedom. Freedom is the ability to move within bounds, right? Freedom is the ability to move within bounds. So if there's no boundaries, there can be no freedom. And that's why without those boundaries, you find the law of the jungle or you find anarchy. But the freedom has to have limits. Freedom has to have boundaries.
So, would you agree with me if I said freedom is what you ought to have after all the necessary laws are in place?
And so this is exactly where we go, is that you cannot have freedom without the establishment of laws, and the laws are only there to ensure the freedom, right? So freedom, if the laws don't ensure freedom, then the laws become oppressive, right? So that's the whole purpose of establishing laws, is to establish freedom in reality. Now, the problem is that, and this begs the question, and so the question then becomes, well, whose boundaries? Who gets to set the boundaries, right? And so the problem becomes that most people, they say the Constitution, or they say, this, whatever it might be, and when we do that, what we find is that when you follow man-made uh, laws, boundaries, if you will, what happens is that they change from generation to generation. They're ever in flux. So, as an example, right here in the United States right now, we have thousands of people who are sitting in jail because they possessed or sold marijuana, right? And yet, at the same exact time, you have storefronts selling marijuana. You have old ladies going in and buying marijuana, walking to their car, driving home, using this as medicine. And so you have part of the law is outdated just from a decade ago or 2 decades ago, where it's illegal. And now you have a new law saying, no, no, it's legal and you can sell it in storefronts. So the problem is that in just 1 decade, you see the law changing. Right, you see the law changing, and what that does is it's still the people who were incarcerated before the law change. They're still being penalized by a law that's no longer existent. How is that just? How is that fair? Right, and so this is, and my go-to, the one that I always go to, is homosexuality, and the reason is in the 60s, maybe in the 50s, but I'm pretty sure in the 60s as well, it was seen as a mental disability, something that could be and was treated through mental health. And then in the late 60s, early 70s, due to the Vietnam War, other than that, the hippie movement, all of these things, it became something that was taboo, but it still happened. And then in the 80s, it became more socially acceptable, where people started coming out and things like that. And then in the 90s, I believe it was the 90s, you had Ellen kiss somebody on television for the first time, and all of a sudden, you're not allowed to be against this. Just, it's a lifestyle choice, right? And then you had Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, all of this propaganda happening, where they normalized this deviancy, the normalization of deviancy. And to the extent that 10 years ago, a little bit more than that, it became unlawful to be against homosexuality. To call it a mental illness was now wrong. And now it's to the point where they're even getting married. And so within just these few decades, we've seen the whole thing turned on its head, to where now somebody who is against it is backwards, whereas just a few years ago, those who did it needed mental health. And so these are the examples that I give. And why? Because they're clear and we lived them. We lived through this period. We watched it unfurl, happen. And so, excuse me. And so what I'm saying here is that when we rely upon the laws of man, they change. And part of the problem is that they change with the philosophies of man. And what that means is that somebody today, and I'll go back to the marijuana thing, that you don't know where you stand. Is it lawful? Is it not lawful? Am I going to get locked up? Am I not going to get locked up? And I'm not endorsing marijuana. I'm simply saying that this is a good example of that. And so, if a person does not know where they stand from one month to another, and I know in my own city and my state, they put out new laws every, I think, twice a year or something like that. And if you missed the memo, well, then you could be breaking the law and you don't know. And so what
Mm,
I'm saying here is that it changes so frequently that you don't know whether you're within the limits of the law or outside the limits of the law for the most part. This isn't freedom. Why isn't this freedom? Because you don't know where you stand as an
mm,
individual, as a human. You don't know whether you're a criminal or not. You don't even know where you stand. You just do the best you can, right? Meaning that you try to be good. Now the thing is that when that's man-made laws, that's man-made boundaries. But when we trust in the limits, when we allow God, the one who created us, the one who and again, I'm coming from a faith perspective, so when the one who originated me and knows me better than I know myself, knows all of humanity better than we know ourselves, when he tells us do this or don't do that, then we understand that these principles are fixed. They're flexible, right? So for example, we can't drink wine, right? We don't, Muslims, we don't drink wine. We don't drink intoxicants. But if I'm choking on something and I can't clear my passageway and there's nothing there and I take a drink of beer or wine or whatever, the fact of the matter is that I didn't sin and I didn't break a law because I used it to save my life, right? And so the rules are fixed, but they're flexible, right? They're flexible. And so we have to understand that only through that kind of a boundary where it's fixed but flexible and everybody really knows where they stand can a person actually live in a state of freedom. And this is why I say what I say. Now, I will also say, and this is an important nuance, that if a person is an atheist and they do not believe in God and they reject the notion of God and they refuse to even hear it, then the best system of government for them, in my opinion, is anarchy. Why? Because they don't believe in any. They then in that particular case, who sets the boundaries for them? Right? There's nothing. They don't believe in God to set the boundaries, and so they're going to do whatever they want. Now, I don't agree with them. I believe that true freedom, not anarchy, because freedom is above anarchy. You have a hierarchy here. The lowest of the low is the law of the jungle. And then to get some semblance of order, you have anarchy. But then to be governed and taste the real fruits of freedom, then you have, or rather, yeah, we could say that, then you have the freedom, which is the living, the movement within the boundaries. And again, I believe that the only way to do that is with laws that are fixed but flexible, and the only way to do that is by the laws of God. And so that brings us immediately to the Sharia, and therefore, following that line of reason, then I believe the only way to really experience freedom in our lives is through living under the Sharia, governing ourselves by the Sharia, but also if we had an Islamic or a Sharia run state. As you mentioned, secular Quranism, this is a good example of that, where the state is governed by the guidance of God.
indeed. I don't know if you can read the question that is being asked by
I
an
can't,
interested viewer.
I, I can't read
I'll
that.
read it for you then.
Okay.
Um, Dean Ambrose says, can you ask him if things like stoning apply today for adultery?
Well, I would hope that our conversation gets there, right? And so I'll answer it now because he asked now, but I would rather, the show take on kind of an organic nature and we get to these things. To answer the question, adultery doesn't get an adulterer doesn't get stoned. An adulterer does not get stoned. Oh, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. An adulterer did get stoned. I was getting ready to twist things around and say the fornicator, but no, the fornicator doesn't get stoned. The adulterer does. Please forgive me. I just twisted them around. So the adulterer, stoning for the adulterer, male or female, right? It does apply. It does apply to this day. However, today you find countries using a firing squad instead of stones, and that's just as bad or that's just as horrible. It might be, right, in your perspective. However, one of the things that we have to understand is why and how. And so again, this is why I prefer these things to be organic, but we'll take the moment and say, first and foremost, if two people commit adultery, then they are only liable to go before a judge if it's witnessed by four people, not, and it has to be clear here. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with my throat, but anyway, I want to lay this case out very clear because there's a misconception. Oh, this person cheated on this person, and so we should kill them. No, that's not what happens here. What happens is that if the penetration, and I use that word because that's the word that we use in law, if the penetration of the we'll say it the way it is, if the penetration of the male phallus goes past the labia of the female, right? So I get descriptive a little bit, trying to use as good language as I can. If that
Mhm.
penetration is witnessed by four witnesses, only then can they be taken to court, right? And so then they are taken to court. The judge hears the case, he listens to the witness, he weighs the evidence because there should be evidence, right? And only then will the judge give his sentence. And if it is a sentence that he finds them guilty, then the punishment for that is stoning, even though, again, today it might be carried out in another way. Now, having said that, what happens if it's only three witnesses? Those three witnesses, if they try to take the case to court, they will be punished for slander. Right? Their witness is not acceptable because there's not a fourth witness, and therefore they're held liable for slander. The other thing is that if they go into this house or this bedroom and they find these two people under the sheets gyrating and they don't see what's happening, right? Their witness is not accepted. Why? Because they did not see the penetration. They can assume, but perhaps these people are clothed under there, or partially clothed at least. And so the penetration itself has to be witnessed. Do you know how hard that would be? Right? That's the thing, is that the aim isn't to go around, oh, he cheated, she cheated, we got to do this, we got to do that. No, it's to safeguard society. And so only when those four witnesses come forth that witnessed actual penetration, and how low does a person have to be to do it in such a way that they're caught by four people at the same time, right? And so this we have to put things in proper perspective. There is one other way that this could happen, and that is if a person goes to the court and they say, for example, I did such and such, right? And if a person does that, if they go and they confess for themselves, then they're actually not allowed to blame the other person. They're not allowed to say, I did such and such with, right? They can't do that. Why? Because how can you? They're not a good witness. And so they would testify four times against themselves, and then the punishment would be carried out on them. And that's because they want that. They want that. And so we want to be very clear. It's not anarchy where people go around, oh, my wife cheated on me, I'm going to kill her. No, I mean, this might happen out of a crime of passion, but in Islam, under the Sharia, then there has to be witnesses, there has to be evidence, and this has to be taken to a court, and the judge has to hear the case before a sentence is handed down. And then that sentence is established by the state. It's not established by mob rule or something like this. And so all of this has to be put into perspective.
I've got another question on the same subject.
Okay.
Uh,
I hope we don't spend our whole time talking about this, but go ahead.
I'm afraid. I hope you get to say your planned speech, but I
No
suppose
problem.
it's
No
good
problem.
that people are
No, of
taking an
course,
interest
of course. No,
while
it's
it's
good.
live.
It's good.
Um, Dean Ambrose asks, "What if a woman who got accused of adultery later says she didn't, but later got pregnant, which proves she was lying? Does she get punished?"
Being pregnant doesn't prove anything, right? Being pregnant doesn't prove that she committed adultery, unless, of course, her husband is celibate, or her husband is away, for a year, or her husband is infertile, and even infertility itself isn't a proof. So traditionally, what would happen is that as long as she didn't confess to it four times in front of a judge, right? As long as she didn't confess to it four times in front of a judge, then what would be considered that would be considered that baby, no matter, and so if it's a white couple and the baby comes out black, just as an example, right? If that happens, the baby is still considered the father, the husband's child. Why? Because they're a married couple. Marriage protects the lineage of that child, even if that child is born in reality out of a state of adultery. Now, if she confesses 4 times, that's something else. The question here
What
is
about a
most
DNA test?
so there's two things and I'm glad you asked that. There's two things in the Sharia that they're not accepted as evidence for capital punishment. Now, they're accepted as evidence for divorce. They're accepted as evidence for lesser crimes, but they're not, meaning that lesser punishments, but they're not accepted for capital punishment. And so even if a person put, like, for example, a nanny cam, a little spy camera in the room, and they watched it and they showed the judge, look, we got it on film. First and foremost, most judges won't watch it, right? And the reason is because they don't want to see smut, right? The other thing is that, unless they're forced in that situation, the other thing is that that camera could be tampered with. The camera could not, maybe it's not picking up what really happened. So capital punishment is never issued on video footage, right? Lesser crimes are, meaning, for example, the judge may say, okay, I issue a divorce, right? But he cannot, or he should not, he's not supposed to issue capital punish based upon video. The same way with the DNA test, because we know DNA tests come up with false negatives, false positives. I actually know a situation very, very near to me, not a friend of mine, and the situation was that they got the DNA test, and it said that the child was his, and it was actually his relatives, right? And so there's another situation that I just read about last week where a woman, every time she gave birth to the children, it's the mother, but they did not have her DNA. The DNA actually said she was like a third or fourth cousin or something like that, because something happened in utero where she absorbed the body of her twin in utero. And now, when the children are born, they're actually born with foreign DNA, not their mother's DNA. And so we know that these things can happen. And so the DNA test can, again, bring about divorce. The judge can issue a lesser punishment, but he cannot issue capital punishment off a DNA test or video. It has to be for witnesses. That is what, or for testimonies against oneself. That is the evidence that is demanded by the Sharia. And none of these other evidences are going to count, because they can always be falsified in one way or another.
I would just like to interject here by saying that the Quran is actually silent on stoning. It doesn't prescribe any stoning. It doesn't say that adulterers are to be stoned, and the punishment comes in the Hadith, does it not?
Well, yes and no. The problem is that with the compilation of with the revelation of the Quran, uh, some of the verses, and so this is the thing, is that some of the verses were abrogated, and from those abrogated verses was the verse of stoning. However, you're absolutely right. What we rely upon today is the hadith for this evidence. Now, one of the things that I will say, and so we wouldn't say, oh no, it's in the Quran, but it's not in the Quran. I wouldn't play games like that. What I would say is that it was revealed, and though it's not part of the Quran that we have today, but it's absolutely found in the sound, authentic hadith, and so we rely upon that. I do want to make one last point, and I think that this will go back to the question that was asked last, and that is, a lot of times what we find in backwards nations where the honestly, the laws are kind of sketchy anyway, in my opinion, and that is just a subjective opinion, but you'll find a woman who is not married, becoming pregnant. And so what they do to this woman is that we hear of their stoning and things like this, but this is not permissible, right? If a woman is not married, if she's not married and she becomes pregnant, she is allowed to have that baby full term. She is allowed to take care of that baby, maybe even nurse that baby until it's 2 years old. And then after the baby is safe, then she would get the prescribed punishment for fornication, which is lashes, right? It's lashes. It's not stoning. And so this needs to be clear as well. The unmarried woman is not going to get the same punishment as the adulteress.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Oh no, no. I was waiting for you to continue with
Okay.
your talk, and
Yeah.
I
So
heard.
I think that part of I think a good place to start, because we jump straight into that end of discussion, is to take a step forward, a leap forward, if you will, and say, the Sharia. A lot of times when we talk about the Sharia, this is exactly the type of questioning that we get, right? Why? Because this is what people hear about. But the fact is that much like American law, and so I'll give you the example of American law, even though the Sharia predates it by over 1,000 years. In American law, you have the federal courts, right? And then you have state courts, and then you have the local municipality courts, city, county courts, and the like. And within each layer of that, you also have, you have business, financial courts or economic courts. You have family court. You have criminal court. There's a system. The law isn't one thing. It's a system of systems. So, for example, if a person is having trouble with business, they're not going to go hire a family lawyer. They're going to hire a business lawyer. Similarly, if somebody has a civil suit, they're not going to find a criminal lawyer. They're going to find a civil lawyer. So it's a system of systems. This is how the Sharia is. The Sharia isn't just criminal law, and this is what most people view it as. Is that when people hear the word Sharia, they automatically go to criminal law, which is interesting because nobody goes down the street wherever they live and say, "What do you think about this law on the book?" Right? Most people don't even know the laws on the books in their municipality, but they somehow the word Sharia comes up and they automatically start talking about criminal law, as though we're all Muslims are criminal lawyers. That's just not the case, right? This is a specialty field for people who are qualified to hear what evidence, to know what evidence is, and then to hear cases and to try cases and so forth and so on. And so this, we have to understand that. I mean, we know what basic laws are. Obviously every human being knows we can't kill, we can't steal, and so forth and so on. However, when it comes to actual criminal cases, then this is a special field. This is a special system of law. So in the Sharia, we have laws pertaining to worship, which is always interesting to me when people say, we want to pass anti-Sharia laws. Well, the way that I shower is according to the Sharia. The way that I eat is according to the Sharia. The way that I dress is according to the Sharia. So you want to get rid of my everyday actions because I govern myself by the Sharia. What justice is that? So this is our. I'm sorry. Let me go back and say the way that we worship is one system. And so our prayer, our purification, our fasting, all of this is governed by the Sharia, right? And then also we have family laws, how we marry, how we divorce, how we raise our children, the child custody, the issue of child custody, how to, not, I don't want to say how to rear the child, but I'll say, for example, nursing the child. This has its own laws. All of these things, all of these aspects of family law have their own branch of the Sharia. And then there's civil laws. What if somebody wants to take something to, a neighbor is infringing upon your property boundaries or something like that? This civil courts have their own court system in the Sharia. Similarly, business, right? And so if somebody is doing business, then there are laws pertaining to that. There's contractual laws in Islam where we have to do things according to the set limits, and we can't trespass those limits. And so, and all of this. So again, we have the branch of worship, the branch of family, the branch of business, the civil law, and then only then after all of that do we find criminal law, right? And so criminal law is again where we get into punishments through a court system, not anarchy, but through a court system. After a judge hears a case, weighs the evidence, and rules upon that case. And then even above that, we have international law. We have state law, politics and things like that, laws that govern state law. And then beyond that, we have international law. And all of that is established in the Quran. All of that is established in the Sharia from 1400 years ago. So it's not, oh, criminal law. Sharia means criminal law. No, that's not the case at all. It's a system of systems, and it should be viewed that way. There's a question, I believe.
No, it was just a comment which I
Oh,
thought
okay.
was quite interesting. He said he about how laws are compromises based on religious understanding, while modern law making fails because it's made by atheists. But ignore that. I
No,
feel I should display intelligent comments. But they're not
no, no.
necessarily
That's
questions.
actually. If there's any questions, feel free to interrupt me. And I'm talking to my phone, and my phone is a good 3 feet away from me, and
Hmm.
so I can't see the small script. So if anybody asks a question, that's good. But whoever this person is, if they go back later and watch the beginning of the video when we talked about freedom, then I believe that the comment they just made is right in line with what I said.
Hmm.
And God knows best. So this system of systems, it has a purpose, right? It has a purpose. And so that purpose, and I think this is a good place to mention that according to the Quran, according to the Sunnah of the Prophet, the prophetic narrations. I'll use that English expression, the prophetic narrations of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. According to this, there's aims by which we have these commands and prohibitions, and those aims, all of them, go back to seven. And these seven, according to Muslims, according to Islam, according to the Sharia, if you will, it is the seven God given inalienable rights of every human being. And this is important to understand when we talk about the Sharia, that we're talking about rights that are inalienable because we're human, right? Because we're human. It doesn't matter whether we're male and female. It doesn't matter whether we're young or old. It doesn't matter whether we're rich or poor, black or white, Arab, non Arab. None of these things, Muslim or non-Muslim, it doesn't matter. You can actually be an atheist and you still have these rights. And so we have to understand that these are inalienable rights, that the entire Sharia is there. All of the commands and prohibitions, all of the rules and regulations are established to protect these for all human beings, for all human beings. And those inalienable rights, again, they're only seven. And I'm not saying that Muslims don't say, oh, no, there's more, or something like that. But these are the basics. These are the ones that nobody argues about. Now, somebody, before I go forward, somebody might say, well, freedom wasn't on this list. And freedom's not on this list. Why? Because human agency, right, is a given. Human agency, meaning our freedom to move within the boundaries, is automatically a given. And that's what we would say is part of our primordial nature, is that we are created upon this agency where we have this natural freedom. And it's only when it's only in the case of oppression that that freedom is usurped, right? And so no, freedom will not be on this list, but that's why, because it's a given, right? Free agency of man is a given in the Sharia. So those seven inalienable God-given rights of every human being, and this is a hierarchy, and so the highest one is a right to faith. And I don't want, I do want to go into detail with each one, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on each one because I'd like to move forward. But the reality is that in Islam, from the very beginning, there has always been freedom of religion. And the concept of forced conversion or something like that, this is from outside of Islam. This has nothing to do with Islam whatsoever. The Prophet himself, peace and blessings be upon him, he allowed Christians to come and pray in his masjid. They were dignitaries from another area. He allowed them to have their services in his masjid. There's never been an issue where there's forced conversion in the Sharia. There's nothing in the Quran that compels anybody to change their religion. In fact, according to the majority of scholars, there's absolute freedom of religion under the Sharia, except for the Muslim. Except for the Muslim. The Muslim is the only exception that we don't have absolute freedom of religion. And why? Because we're not allowed to change our religion and then oppose it. A Muslim, according to some, they can change their religion. That's a whole nother discussion. But they're not allowed to then oppose the religion, meaning take an adversarial stand where they start, propagating against the religion. That's seen as a crime. But it's only applicable to Muslims. So, for example, if a Jewish person said, no, I'm going to become a Christian and I'm going to teach against Judaism and propagate Christianity, build my own church and call people to Christianity. In the Sharia, that's perfectly lawful, and the courts have nothing to do with that, and that's except to protect their right. that is their right to do that. And so freedom of religion is established right at the very beginning in Islam, and we can always, I'm sure, people have heard this 1,000 times. La ikraha fi din. There's no compulsion in deen or in religion. There's no compulsion in religion. So this is established straight away from the Quran. So the reality is that we all have a right to faith. This is why Muslims are commanded to pray 5 times a day. This is part of the reason why we fast in Ramadan, because this protects our freedom. It protects our right to faith. Why? Because it builds and strengthens our faith. It builds our dynamic living relationship with a loving God. And so this is the reality here, is that when we talk about the God-given inalienable rights, faith is at the top, and then life. Right, so life is the second God-given inalienable right. And somebody said, well, or somebody may say, why isn't life over faith? And the reason is that uh, there's a chapter in the Quran. It's called Ar-Rahman, the most compassionate. It's the 55th chapter of the Quran.
Hmm.
In it, God says, He says, Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, Khalaq al-Insan. Right? And so here He says that He, God, is the most compassionate. He revealed to mankind the Quran, meaning guidance. Not, it doesn't mean the Quran, it means guidance here. He revealed to man guidance. And then he created, it doesn't say it says he revealed the Quran, right? He revealed guidance, and he created man, right? Now, why, according to the exegetes, why did he mention the Quran before creation of life? Because life without guidance is miserable. Look around, right? Life
Hmm.
without guidance from God is anarchy, or worse than that. It's oppressive. It's difficult. People are hurting because they don't follow the guidance. And so, proof of God's compassion is that He gave us guidance before we were even in this world. And so, this is why because of these verses, faith is above life. And there's another important point here, and I know I keep taking one step forward and 2 steps back, but it's worth it, I hope. In this hierarchy, there's a reason why we talk about this being a hierarchy, because you can sacrifice a lesser one to protect a higher one, but you would not naturally, meaning normally, you would not give up a higher one to protect a lower one. So, for example, a Muslim will give up their life to protect their faith. Right, and so this is just an example, but we'll leave it at that. So a person can renounce their faith publicly to save their life. But what we would not find is somebody who renounces, like gives up their faith, like leaves their faith to save their life. This is seen as being a wrong, not a crime, but a wrong in Islam, because they forfeited one right, a lesser right. I mean, a greater right for a lesser right. So
Hmm.
anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. What I want to say here is the first one is faith. The second one is life. Every single human being has a inalienable right to life. I will make one, like I said, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I will make a nuance here and say that when we say inalienable, that doesn't mean that a person cannot forfeit their right by committing a crime that is known to carry the capital punishment. So, for example, if I murdered somebody, may God protect me, but if I murdered somebody, that forfeits my personal right to life. Why? Because I've taken the life, and I know that the punishment for this is established, a life for a life. And so a
Hmm.
person can forfeit their right by committing a crime that carries another sentence but this is an exception to the rule. So murder, as an example, is unlawful in Islam. Why? Because every single human being has a right to life. So this is the second. You got faith, you have life. The third is intellect, right? So every single human being has a right to intellect. They have a right to education. They have a right to use their rational mind in the best possible ways. This is why drugs are unlawful in Islam, because now you're harming your own intellect, as an example.
Hmm. Hmm.
The fourth God given inalienable right of every single human being is honor. Right? So we have a right to honor. This is one of the reasons why we could point back again to alcohol, but also fornication is unlawful, because fornication itself leads to dishonor. It dishonors the woman, it dishonors her family, it does, so forth and so on. And so this honor is a right in Islam, right? It's a right. And then the fifth is lineage. And this is an interesting one, and this is where I'm sure that you'll want to pick up a little bit, if not while we're talking, then, after I finish this list. And that is, every single human being that is born has a right to lineage. And when a parent, when a mother or a father has that child outside of marriage, outside of the bonds of marriage, then that child is illegitimate. And what that means is that it can no longer claim the lineage of the father. Right? It is now ascribed to the lineage. It's called the child of the bed, meaning it's mother's child, meaning that it follows the mother's lineage. It does not follow the father's lineage. You have now stripped that child of a right. You've oppressed that child, right? That child is born in an oppressed state because you've taken something that is its birthright, and that is lineage. And now, when the children have rage, when they have this sadness, this depression, when they look for something because they're missing something, and so they turn to alcohol, they turn to violence, they wreak havoc on society. When they do this, understand that they are working from a place of oppression, because they was oppressed from the time they were conceived, because they had the right to be conceived legitimately, and you took that right from them. Right. And so it's important to understand that the right to lineage is a human right in Islam, and to violate that is oppression. Right? And then the fifth right is the right to property. And so, or I'll say property first. These last two, they can be interchanged. And so, property, every single human being has a right to property, meaning that if this is my house, it's my house. You don't have a right to take it from me. The government doesn't have a right to take it from me. Nobody can usurp my property. This watch on my arm is mine. Nobody has a right to take it from me. And so, stealing becomes unlawful. And the like. So one of the interesting things is that what is wealth in general? I mean, we can all differ, give different answers, but in a general sense, wealth is what remains after the money is spent, right? And so wealth is what's left over after property, if you will. And again, we can always disagree about these things, but Muslims also have, not Muslim, I'm sorry, the Sharia establishes that every single human being has a right to wealth. And so, for example, gambling is unlawful in Islam. Interest is unlawful in Islam. Why? Because this is a way of usurping somebody's right to wealth. And so,
Mhm.
in this way, all of the laws, all of the commands, all of the prohibitions are there to preserve faith, life, intellect, honor, lineage, wealth, and property. I know I just switched them up again, but these last two, like I said, are interchangeable. So, all of the laws are there to preserve this. Why? Because every single human being, whether male or female, young or old, white or black, Arab, non-Arab, Muslim or non-Muslim, Christian, atheist, it doesn't matter. Every single human being has a right to these, has these inalienable rights that they're born with, because God has decreed it so. And so this is the purpose of the Sharia, is to protect these rights of man.
It certainly sounds fair enough to me. I've never seen it. I've never heard it presented in this way before, but it's really quite reassuring.
And this is why, this is why I said this is where I wanted to explain, because you call for secular Quranism, and one of the things is that when people hear Sharia, all they think about is criminal law. They don't understand the why, right? They don't understand the how, and all they hear is thieves' hands getting cut off or adulterers getting stoned. They don't understand that these rules are in place to protect mankind, to protect our rights, so that nobody oppresses us.
Yes, it certainly dignifies the human, the individual, better than the man-made laws that we have now.
And again, these all of these laws, the laws themselves, they're established for this purpose, but they're still flexible. So, for example, a person may step outside of the laws on a lesser right in order to preserve a higher right. And this is understandable in the Sharia. So, for example, somebody has a gun to your head and they say, for example, do X, Y, Z. You're allowed to do that to protect your life. It's compulsion, and there's no blame in compulsion. And so a person may commit a crime under duress, and they're not guilty for that. And so it's always going to be about preserving these rights for humanity.
Mhm, mhm.
And if I may, just one quick, there was a point that I wanted to make earlier, but it slipped my mind. But one of the things that I do want to say is that all seven of these inalienable rights goes back to the two highest aims, and I mentioned them yesterday, and we want to keep this in some semblance of context, is that this is we do believe that this is guidance from God. It's not man-made. It's guidance, revealed guidance from God, being that we believe that the Quran is the word of God. And so we want to understand that all of this is there so that to facilitate the Sharia is there, these rights are there, everything is there to facilitate man's ability to live up to our highest potential. And what does that mean? I mean, we can define it in various ways, but I'm going to go back to what I said yesterday, and that is that we establish, protect, and perfect our relationship with God, and we establish, protect, and perfect our relationship with creation. And creation here means ourselves. It means our fellow man, all of our fellow men. Without, I know what I wanted to say. I'll bring that up in a minute, but all of our fellow men indiscriminately, and also animals, right? Animal rights. Also the planet itself, removing harms from the earth, pollutants and the things like that. So all of this, when we say establishing, protecting, and perfecting our relationship with creation, we mean all of creation, not just each other, all of creation. And so all of the aims of the Sharia go back to these two greater aims, and that is our relationship with God and our relationship with creation. And I mentioned yesterday the biblical verses. I believe it's in Matthew. I'm pretty sure it's in Matthew, where he was tried and he said, what is the greatest commandment? He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. What is the second greatest commandment? It is to love for your neighbor which you love for yourself. And all the other laws hang on these two, right? And this is exactly the message of Islam. In Islam, a man, in the prophetic narrations, we find a man went to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and he said, tell me something about Islam that I'll never have to ask anybody else. I can't ask anybody else, and I'll never have to ask anybody. And so the Prophet said 5 words to him, and I'll just shoot them out in Arabic, and then I'll give you the English. He said, Kul amantu billah thumma istaqim. That was his reply. Kul amantu billah thumma istaqim. This man is saying, give me something so comprehensive, I'll never have to ask anybody else about Islam again. And the Prophet said 5 words. He said, say, I believe in God, and then be upright, right? Say, I believe in God, and then be upright. That's it, right? That's Islam. That goes back to these, say, I believe in God. That is your relationship with God. That is loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And then being upright is how you carry yourself, how you treat other human beings. And that is, again, loving for others what you love for yourself. Again and again in the Quran, we see Alladina amanu wa amilu salihat, those who believe and do righteous good deeds. In fact, one of the verses of the Quran, if I don't mess it up, God said, he said, Inna alladina amanu wa amilu salihat, ulaika hum khayrul bariyah. Indeed, those who believe and do righteous good deeds, they're from the best of creation. Those people who they seek to establish, protect, and perfect their relationship with God, and they seek to establish, protect, and perfect their relationship with creation, they're the best of creation. They're the best of people. We don't look at race. We don't look at nationality. We don't look at language. We don't look at any of these things. What we look at is, where are you with God? And where are you with your fellow men? How are you with God? And how do you treat your fellow human beings? This is really what it's all about. This is what it's all about. And the Sharia is there to facilitate that. Right? That's the entire excuse me, that's the entire purpose of the Sharia. If there's no questions from you or the audience, I'll go, but I want to always give a pause so that if there's anything that you wanted to mention.
Well, we're agog to hear what you're going to say next. I mean, you've explained it quite clearly, so I don't disagree with any of it. I think I did manage to make my point about the stoning not being mentioned in
Yeah,
the Quran, and I don't have any questions. And somebody was very impressed with what you said.
good.
He's an American with a southern accent. But anyway, I gave him your Twitter um,
Okay.
link, and have you a further point to make, or is
Oh,
this does
I
this
always have
complete
more.
your
No,
lecture?
no, no, no. There's two more things. There's two more things, but I do want to take a step back, and because I wanted to make a point and I forgot it, and that is that you do have Muslims, right? And so I think that it's fair to always point out the fact that Muslims are human beings, right? And so the same crazy that you find elsewhere, you're going to find in Islam. It's not unique to the Muslims, nor is it not found in the Muslims, you know. And so we're humans, and you find all kinds of types, just like everywhere else. And
Mm,
so I was having a discussion with somebody from a Southeast Asian country, and I mention that because we have to understand that sometimes when you deal with different people, you're dealing with their cultural background more than you are their Islam. And so this man, he believed that when at first he didn't want his wife to work. And I was like, you know, she has a woman has a right to earn money. She has a right to save money. She has a right to spend her money. She has a right to waste her money. If it's her money, it's her money, right? And so we have to understand that. And I said this to him, and he said, "Well, if she makes money, I want to manage her money, and I'll give her allowance." I was like, "What do you mean? You know, if this is your wife, how are you going to give your wife an allowance? She's not a kid, and it's her money. How are you going to take her money and then give it back to her?" And he's like, "Well, women can't be trusted with money." And I'm like, "Well, what about men? You know, men who can't be trusted with money. Should a woman take his money and give it to him?" And he didn't want to touch that. So my point being here is that you're going to find crazy, right? You're going to find
mm,
crazy. But these rights, including the right to wealth and property, is established for male and female without exception. So a woman has the same right as a man in the Sharia. And we want to be very clear about this. The relationship between a husband and wife, if I'll throw out Arabic and then I'll try to translate it, it is the relationship of an amir and a wazir. And what we mean by that is that the amir is like the how to say this. I don't like the translation. They often say prince, but that's not a good translation. We'll say a governor, right? A governor is actually the best translation, perhaps. So the husband is the governor, and the wife is the minister, meaning the advisor. And so the
mm,
husband is the ruler of the home, and the wife is the advisor to that ruler. And so he doesn't he is the head of the household. He does guide the family. He is responsible. Ultimately, the husband is the one who is responsible for the well-being, the protection, and the provision of his family. Right. That's ultimately the reality. There are some dynamics we don't need to get into. I'm talking about the normal, natural state of affairs. It
mm,
can be reversed, but that, despite that, he doesn't oppress his family. He doesn't, you know, he's not a tyrant over his wife. If he is, then he's a tyrant, you know. But generally speaking, a good man, a strong man, a man who is secure in his masculinity, a man who is secure in who he is, a man who is trying to be upright. He's going to listen to his wife. He's going to take into consideration what she says. He's going to take her input, and then he's going to process that against what he already knows. And perhaps her idea is better than his. Perhaps her guidance is better than his. Perhaps she's wiser than he is. And so he'll listen to her. Or perhaps he says, "No, I heard her, but I still think this is the best course." Ultimately, the responsibility lies on his shoulders. But we want to be very clear here that despite this relationship of the governor and the advisor, despite that relationship, their rights are the same, meaning that they have equal rights under the law, they have equal rights before God, they have equal status before God. And that's not necessarily true, because perhaps the wife is far better than the husband. But my point being is that we don't want to ever think that the man has a right to wealth and these things and the woman doesn't, or that the man is over the woman. No, if a man takes his wife's property, if he takes her wealth, or he doesn't allow her to spend her wealth, doesn't allow her, you know, then this is oppression, and it's a
mm.
violation of her rights. So I wanted to make that clear, because a lot of people have this perception of Islam that men have these rights and women are under the men, and this isn't accurate at all. And so I did want to clarify that.
And
Um,
thank you for your analogy of the wife being the advisor and the man being the governor. I think it honours both parties.
Yeah, no, and that's, it's important that we keep these analogies, because the fact is that uh, the wife has her own authority, right? There is an authority that she has, and a wife remains an independent, free agent, meaning that she is not a slave or a servant or a puppet of her husband. She is an independent human being with her own rights and responsibilities. And
And not
this is
subject to coverture.
exactly, exactly. There is, I mean, again, there are times when a husband might have to put his foot down about a certain issue. I don't want you around them because they're doing this. Oh, but they're my friends. I want to go out with them. No, I don't want you around them. In this particular case, then the wife should honor her husband. And that's really what it's about, is respecting the position of the husband, respecting the responsibility of the husband. But the same goes vice versa. If the woman says, every time you go out with the guys, you get in trouble, you do this, you do that, I would really like you not to go out with them. The husband should he should listen to his wife's wisdom in this particular case. It doesn't mean that either has to obey. They could both disobey, but that disobedience is really more of dishonoring or disrespect one of the other. And so again, I just want to be very clear that though the husband ultimately is the head of the household, and what he says goes for his home, it should be that way anyway. That doesn't equal oppression of the women. It should never equal oppression of the woman.
Mhm.
She has her own position of authority or her own free agency, and especially when there are kids involved, then she has to be respected by all parties. Because and the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he was asked about who has the most right to our good treatment, who has the most right to our honor, and he said, your mother. They said, then who? He said, your mother. They said, then who? He said, your mother. They said, then who? He said, your father. So your mother, your mother, your mother comes first, and then your father. And so we have to put these things in perspective.
Thank you. I have somebody Jewish in the chat. I was wondering if you have a message for Jews who.
You know, the issue with these the a message for, right, and so the issue with message for is that it'll take me off topic, and I don't mind that, but the thing is that the message is universal. It's for everybody, and I don't care what the person, they could be atheist, they could be Hindu, they could be Jewish or Christian, they could be Muslim, and the message is going to remain the same. What I would say to any Jew, honestly, is that they believe, it's part of their faith, it's part of their beliefs, that there is a succession of prophets. And so, for example, Abraham came, and then Isaac came, and then for example, Jacob came, and then Joseph came, and Moses and David and Solomon, and so there's a progression. The message never changed. The message is, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Right? So they believe this, but they stop at a certain point. Now, the Christians believe that Jesus was a great teacher, a prophet, a messenger. They believe that he's the Messiah. Jews say no, he's a false prophet. He's a Dajjal, a antichrist. He's a false Messiah, right? And so they reject Jesus, and they don't accept anybody from that period on. So their message, their belief stops there. It just stops, and then they rely upon the teachings of old, and not even necessarily the teachings of old, but rather, for example, the Talmud and these rabbinical teachings that are running commentaries on these things. And I don't want to get into all of that. Now, the Christians, they say no, we believe in all of that, but we also believe in the Messiah being Jesus Christ. Peace and blessings be upon him. And so then the Muslims, we're here and we say that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And Jesus said, what did Jesus say? He said, the Lord your God is one. Jesus said, worship your God and my God, your Father and my Father, right? God is one. Oh, our Father who art in heaven. Jesus worshiped, he bowed down to, he cried to, he prayed to God, right? And so this is the teachings of Jesus. And what did the Christians say? They say, see, he's a prophet just like the prophets of old. The Jews say no, the Christians say yes. Okay, so the Christians take it one step farther. Now, when we say that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was also a prophet, then what happens is two things. You have some of the Jews who say, yes, he was a Noahamic prophet. He was a non-Hebrew prophet, is really what they're saying. We accept that. Some of them say this, that it's clear that he was a prophet, but he was only sent to the non-Jews, right? And then you have some that say no. Christians say no all across the board, right? But the reality is, so Muslims, right? So Jews, they accept the progression of prophets up to a point and they stop. Christians then say, no, we also accept Jesus. Muslims say, we accept all of this and we accept the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So it's one message. It's one message in a line of prophets. The question is, where do you stop and why? And so my message is simple, that this is one message from the one true God, right? And so why stop? Why not? Why stop in the morning when we can make it to the evening, right? Meaning, why stop down here when more messengers have come to us? And so my message is for everybody, is that don't stop. Take it to the end, and that is the seal of prophethood. But like I said, this takes us off topic, and I hope that I made that clear. I just,
Mhm.
I just want to make it very clear that we're not, this isn't a new message. This isn't something foreign to anyone. This is the
Mhm.
one message that was revealed to all of the prophets. And that, it's nothing more than the progression of prophets until our time.
Mhm. I have probably another off-topic question, which is your. And I only ask it because people in a chat, somebody in the chat mentioned your finger tattoos. Is this something you be okay discussing, or perhaps another time, or not at all?
Okay, so it's important. It's actually slightly relevant. Tattoos are unlawful in Islam, right? Tattoos are unlawful, and so much so that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he said, anyone who gets tattoos or gives tattoos, they're removed from the mercy of God. La'natullah. They are removed from the mercy of God. So you won't find, you shouldn't find. We do, like I said, you find crazy everywhere, but you shouldn't find Muslims getting or giving tattoos. This is unlawful under the Sharia. Why? Because it's from the tricks of Satan to change our. God created us in the best of molds. Human beings, we are the best form. We're the most. We're created in the best of form, and so it's only from the tricks of Satan to get us to belittle or uglify. That's not a word. I just made it up. But to make this form that God created beautiful, to make it ugly. And so tattoos are from those ways that human beings do this. Um, Now, having said that, I mentioned yesterday, and I don't assume all the viewers are the same people from yesterday, so they didn't hear some of this. When I was a teenager, I hit the streets. I come from Baltimore City, which is one of the most violent cities in the U.S. I was raised in the projects in this particular city, housing projects, meaning state-run housing, and so I come from a violent neighborhood in a very violent city. And when I hit the streets, when I became a teenager, that's what we did, and so I ran with gangs. I did what I did in my youth, and these tattoos are scars from bad decisions I made when I was a teenager. It's an interesting thing that I actually have a tattoo on my chest that when I was most of my tattoos are homemade. Again, this is before I got my tattoos, before it was a thing, before it became popular, before Miami Ink became a TV show, or these things that propagated the tattoo industry. But so we would make our own tattoo guns, we make our own ink and things like that. And I started getting a tattoo on my chest, and it's a pistol, it's a revolver pointing at you, and it says 100% thug. That's what it says on my chest, right? And the problem is that it didn't come out very clearly. I had to go back and get it. I had to get it done again, because that's what happens when you use homemade ink. So um, between the time, I had to let it heal first and then go back and get it done a second time. Before I went back to get it done a second time, I entered Islam. And so I still have this, it's done, it's visible, but it needs a second coat. I never got it finished. Why? Because one of the first things they said is that this is unlawful, don't do anymore. And so when I entered Islam, I never got my tattoo finished. And this is, so I want to be clear, all of this is from before Islam. It's before I became a Muslim. And so I mean, I have them up my arms and down my legs, and on my chest and my back. I have it on the back of my neck. I have a lot of tattoos, but all of them, every one of them, is from before Islam.
Thank you for your explanation.
No problem. Going back to the Sharia for just a moment, and then we can move on. I want to say that the a principle of the Sharia is that every single thing in the world and every action in the world, by its nature, is lawful and pure, right? It's lawful and pure, unless, and this is the condition, unless there's a clear text prohibiting it. So, for example, a Muslim would never say, is it lawful for me to eat this chocolate or not? No, chocolate, why wouldn't it be? Right? Why wouldn't it be? Is it lawful for me to, I don't know, bungee jump? Right? Yeah, why wouldn't it be? Right? Unless you're throwing yourself into harm or something like that. So my thing here is that we have to understand that everything by its very nature, and this goes again back to freedom and man's agency, is that the nature of everything in this world and every action, every substance, that I'm not talking about intoxicants and the like, I'm just talking about food and these types of things. All of it is lawful and pure unless there's a clear text indicating otherwise, which means that a person doesn't have to constantly question things. They can just be. Now, worship, on the other hand, worship is the exact opposite of this in the Sharia. So every act of worship is deemed unlawful unless there's a clear text permitting it. Why? Because people worship God in ways, or gods, or the like, in ways that are unlawful. So I'll just give you a brief example and say that we see different societies in the past, and there's many. It's not just European or African. We see many different cultures doing this, where they would literally build a bonfire in the night and they would take their clothes off and they would dance around it, or dance around their idol, or whatever the case might be, dancing around naked as a form of worship. There, this, these. So what I'm saying is, people corrupt worship, and when it comes to God, God deserves the best from mankind, and so He has shown us how to worship through the example of His prophets, through the example of His messengers, through His revealed scriptures. And so, unless there's a clear text making this form of worship lawful, then all forms of worship are unlawful under the Sharia. That's worship, right? But in your everyday life, it's the opposite. Everything is lawful and pure, unless again there's a clear text. So we want to remind about free agency from time to time, because we don't want anybody to think that the Sharia is some oppressive system where you can't do this, you can't do that. The can'ts are very minor, maybe under 20 things that we absolutely can't do by law. And
So would it be
yeah,
correct to say that what is not forbidden is allowed?
it's this goes right into my next point, and I'm going to say, as a broad brushstroke, right, as a broad comprehensive answer, yes, right. That's a broad comprehensive answer. But now I'm going to get into nuance. So everything that a person does, without exception, and you can ask me about any single topic, meaning I don't want you to ask me about any single topic, but I'm saying you can bring up any single topic and it will fall into this one of these five categories. Everything falls under five rulings in Islam, right? And there's some jurists and schools, that the Hanafi school, I don't want to get into it, but they have seven or nine or something like this. But the reality is that there are five basic rulings in Islam, and everything falls into one of these five rulings. And so those five rulings are, I love to do this, just not to waste time, but because I like to show the complication and just be simple about it. So the complication is, we have to know Arabic. And I'm just going to run through this. I don't expect anybody to know these things. It's wajib, it's mustahab, it's mubah, it's makruh, it's haram, right? So these five rulings. Now, what does that mean? So in English, we would say it's obligatory, or it's highly recommended, or it's permissible, merely permissible, or it's disliked, or it's forbidden. Now, each one of these have a meaning. So something that is obligatory, if you do it, there's reward. And if you leave it off, then it is considered a sin or a crime. It depends. Is it against God, or is it against man? Is it against yourself, or is it against someone else? And so it's either, if you leave it off, an obligation, it's either a sin or a crime. No matter what, it's a vice. I'll use the word vice. So the obligation, if you do it, there's reward. If you don't, it's a vice. Right? It's a vice. The highly recommended actions, then these, if you do it, there's a reward. But if you don't, it's not a vice, right? So there's no harm if you don't do it, but it's better if you do. The permissible acts, right? Those that are merely permissible. If you do it, it's cool. If you don't, it's cool. It's okay no matter what, right? You don't get any reward for it. You're not incurring sin if you don't do it. I ate this morning. I didn't, but I ate this morning. Okay, no problem. It's permissible to eat, right? And so this is the middle, and then the next one is disliked. And so disliked means that if you do it, right, there's no there's no harm, there's no vice if you do it. But if you leave it, you get reward for that, right? And then the last one is that it's forbidden. And forbidden means that if you do it, it's forbidden means if you do it, it's a vice, and if you leave it, there's reward. And so these five rulings, that's complicated, right? Even with English, that's a bit complicated. So let's simplify the whole thing, right? We'll simplify the whole thing. Every single thing in human nature, in human action, falls under the sharia into five rulings. Those five rulings very easily is: you must do it, you should do it, you can do it, you shouldn't do it, you must not do it. That's it, right? So
Mm.
everything falls into these five rulings. Either you must, you should, you can, you shouldn't, you must not. That's it. And so everything that we do is governed by this. And then the question becomes, well, what is the legal ruling? And so the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he said, "Talabul ilm faridatun ala kulli Muslim." Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every single Muslim. And from the least knowledge that we should have is that, is this deed that I'm about to do, what is the legal ruling? I'm going to get in my car later and take my family out for a walk, right? For a hike. And so do I have to? No, it's permissible. Why wouldn't it be permissible, right? I don't have to go and ask a jurist. I don't have to do some deep research. This is permissible. Why? Because everything in this world is permissible unless there's a clear text prohibiting it. And that, so it simplifies it. It's very simple. It's very simple. And the whole point of all of this is that a human being uses their free agency. Uh, let me take one step back and say the whole aim of this is so that we can enjoy freedom, right? The whole aim of this is so that we can actually taste what real freedom is, right? So that we can live lives of freedom. And the reason we have that freedom is so that we use our free agency to align our limited free will with the commanding will of God, meaning the guidance of God. So that's what it's all about, really, is aligning ourselves with the guidance of God, living godly lives, if we can use that term, living lives that are pleasing to our Lord, exposing ourselves to His pleasure and shielding ourselves from His displeasure. And again, that's what it's all about: is our relationship with God and our relationship with His creation. And I think that this is enough of an introduction for the Sharia that people would have a good understanding, a good foundational understanding of what the Sharia actually is for. Not necessarily what it is, but what it is for. What is if we can use this term, the philosophy of the Sharia. I don't like using that term, but what I would say is that the aims and objectives of the Sharia, what is it all about, and why do we even have these rules and regulations? And so I hope that we've explained this clearly from beginning to end. And if there's anything from you we can add, or anything from the audience.
I think you've done a wonderful job of explaining the nature and purpose of these rules, which is to protect us from harming ourselves and others. And there's something very satisfying about these, 5 degrees of, permissiveness, or, the obligatory, the whatever you said. Um, it would help a lot of people, I think, to protect them from doing things that they shouldn't do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, being very simple about it. And so worrying about obligation, permissible, must, should, can, shouldn't, mustn't. That's it. That's it. And it's very basic human nature. It's very basic human nature. And that's the thing, is that it's not made for us to complicate our lives. It's made so that this can flow from us, so that we can just simply be. And that's all we're supposed to be: free agents living under a free society, just flowing, right? And the only way to do that is by having a system that permits that and facilitates that. And so and again, when you say Quranic, secular Quranism, This is what I'm thinking: a society that facilitates the protection of and freedom of the citizens.
Yes, when you said that the five degrees of what is
It's the five rulings. We say the five rulings in
the five
Islam.
rulings? Thank you. It made me think of the gears of a car.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Go fast, slow it back down.
Yes.
Whoa, stop right there. That's no, that's good.
Okay. Okay. Well,
I do. If there's nothing, you said well, and I want to see if you have a statement, and then I want to go back to what you had mentioned. When we were talking about coming on live, you had brought something up, and so I think it's worth discussing. But I
mhm.
want to first ask, is there? You said well, so I wanted to see if you had anything to follow up with.
No, I think we can go back to what you were going to talk to because there's nothing in the chat that's worth mentioning.
Okay. So what I you had mentioned, and I don't remember exactly what, you had mentioned something about how the Sharia would protect the family or something like this. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and then I'll comment. But I wanted to hear your position on this thought.
Um, well, we should protect ourselves and obviously the well-being of those around us, and the traditional presumption is that members of our family would be around us, and well, it makes sense to behave well in order to protect the people who are supposed to care about us, and and those we care about. So it makes perfect sense to me.
The reason that I asked is because I read the article yesterday, that you had sent to me about, what was it called, white Sharia or something like this, and in that article, as I mentioned to you in private, there was some very troubling things, that these men from, these white, supremacists, I guess, or white nationalists from Charlottesville, um, a place that I actually happen to visit from time to time. They, excuse me, they had mentioned, they wanted the Sharia, and part of it started as a joke, but basically they were saying how they could, control their women and force their women to cover, and these types of things. And I think that we want to understand that the Sharia is not a tool, to oppress anyone inside the house or outside of the house. And I hope that I made that clear today. But what it does do, one of the things that it does aim to do, is establish a secure, safe society. And we talked some about this yesterday. And the secure and safe society comes from secure and safe communities. And the secure and safe communities can only come from family bonds. And these bonds are being attacked today, to where marriage is becoming less and less important. Having children is seen as detrimental, even in many of our societies. And so the fact of the matter is that, the Sharia is there to help strengthen the bonds of family, to help strengthen these ties, so that, and this is very important to understand, is that we don't I don't even want to talk about fornication and adultery so much as I do want to talk about marriage. And one of the things to understand is that when how to put this, when two people are having a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever adults might call it, when they have this relationship, it's really selfish in nature. It is selfish. Say, for example, may God protect me, that I had a girlfriend. I'd say, oh, she's beautiful, she's attractive, she's smart, she's witty, she makes me laugh. Well, what happens when she gets sick and she no longer is attractive? What happens when she no longer makes me laugh? Right. And so these things, then she gets old, and I break up with her and I leave her for somebody else. Or, maybe I keep her around and find two or three other girlfriends to make me laugh or something like that. And so it's very selfish in nature. Whereas when it comes to marriage, not just in Islam, marriage as an institute, it's really about sacrifice. It's about giving up something from yourself. making yourself vulnerable, yes, of course, but also giving up something of yourself so that you can take care, because now you have a responsibility to this person. So you're now, oh, she's no longer as attractive as she was 20 years ago before we had children. Well, of course not. Right, of course not. But she should still be attractive to you, and you shouldn't be looking elsewhere. Why? Because you have a bond, a commitment. You started a family, right? And so now you don't drop her and just go chase the other one because it's convenient, or because she no longer makes you laugh, or whatever the case might be. The fact is that that's childish and immature and selfish at its core, right? While marriage is all about responsibility. And so we form these marriage bonds, and marriage is never about two people. And this is a huge problem that we find today, is that I want to find somebody that I love. I want to find somebody that makes me feel good. Yeah, but are they a good fit for your family? Are they a good fit for your community? Are your families going to get along? All of this is important, right? So the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he gave us criteria. So you look at a woman's beauty or a man's beauty, right? You look at their background, their family, their lineage. You do look at that. You look at their social class, their economics, their wealth. You do look at these things, and you also look at their faith. And so these are four things that you examine before you get into a marriage. And along with that, you have to make sure that, again, it's compatible, because it's not two people getting married. It's two families joining bonds. You are the link that links these two families, and your children will be part of both of these families, and that makes it inseparable. And so this is the foundation of communities. Now these two families and their these two parents and their grandchild, and those two parents and their grandchild get married, and they have, now you have four families tied together, and they're all living in the neighborhood. And so these four families, all of the children are cousins, they're in-laws, there's family bonds, and so that strengthens. Now it's not just, groups of people living in the same. Now it's a bond, they can't be separated, right? There's blood involved, and so there's strength in that, there's care in that, there's concern in that, there's compassion in that. And so in order to really have a strong community, there has to be familiar family bonds. And in order to have a strong society, it has to be based upon family. And so this is, we want to understand that marriage is the bedrock. It's the bedrock of every strong society, every strong community. And the bedrock of marriage is the bond, and it's a sacred bond. It's not a civil bond. It's a sacred bond. And if you look at all of the different words that wedlock, marriage, all of these things, all of them go back to sacred origins or sacred meanings about a bond, a ritual bond. And so it's not a civil matter. It's not just a legal matter. It's a bond. It's a sacred bond before God, and that is the bedrock. That is the foundation of every single family unit. And so these things are not just protected in Islam or under the Sharia. They're not just protected. They're enforced by the Sharia in order to protect society. Now, I just want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here and say, what we see in America, in my city, I'll speak about my city, and my city is not unique in this, and you can find it in little rural, countrysides, or you can find it in other major cities. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter what continent you go to, right? The fact is that when a girl, right, goes to a party and she sees a guy that she likes, and that Little Red Riding Hood, I know, right? This is weird. Little Red Riding Hood is a story about a girl who goes out into the world, and she's told to go to grandma's house, but along the way the wolf, she encounters the wolf. The wolf is the men, right? And they pretend to be grandma, they pretend to care about her, they pretend to be a place of security for her in order to lure her away from her family and devour her, right? It's a story about, it's a story warning young girls against the predatory men, right? And so that it's just what that story means. And
Mhm.
now that's the reality in our society, is that a girl goes out, the public school, we'll start at public school. She goes to public school. The boy's like, hey, you're pretty. I like you. You're so sweet. You should be my girlfriend. She says, okay. He kisses her. Next thing, if you're my girlfriend, if you really love me, you'll do this, you'll do that. Maybe she gets intoxicated. Maybe she doesn't. It's irrelevant. Things happen, right? He lured her away. He manipulated her, and he slept with her, right? She becomes pregnant. She has a child. He doesn't, he has no commitment. He has no responsibility. He says, I'm a child myself. He disappears. How do I even know it's mine? She's probably slept with 5 guys. I don't know, right? So now she's left abandoned to raise that child by herself. Now, what that means is that she starts getting state assistance. She also gets a reputation for somebody who sleeps around, right? Now, because she's a woman who enjoys company, all of us do, and she wants to be loved, she allows another predator to come. Perhaps the same thing happens. Now she's got 2 children. She's on financial assistance. We'll say welfare. She gets her house partially paid for, food stamps, all of these things. And then there's this perpetual cycle. Now she has a house, she has an income coming from the state. So men say, hey, man, she gives out, she sleeps with men, and I don't have to pay for anything because the government's doing it for me. Let's go hang out at her house. And so she becomes a victim. And now what happens is that many of her aspirations have been cut short due to these predators. So her education suffers, her financial future suffers, and her honor suffers. Now, along with that, what happens is she's raising these children in this environment who don't know their father. And so now they have a rage about them. They have depression. Now they look for the filling of that male void, that void of fatherhood. And so perhaps they join a gang, or perhaps they become drug addicts, or whatever the case might be. And the males, perpetuate that predatory behavior, and they find a girl, and the girls perpetuate. Now, what ends up happening is in this neighborhood, right? Good people move out and bad people move in. Why? Because nobody wants to be associated with that. Nobody wants to be associated with the fornication, the illegitimate children, the violence, the crime that comes, or the state sponsoring of the welfare system, I'll just say. So people
Mhm.
move out of that neighborhood, and that neighborhood goes down in value and in decency. The neighborhood becomes a place of crime. The education system falters. These children don't do well in school, so forth and so on. And so this perpetuates itself cycle after cycle. And what ends up happening is that these areas where we find this in, violence increases, education declines, we find addiction being rampant. We find mental illnesses occurring. We find women not being living up to their full potential, and actually being oppressed, not just by the men, but by the state themselves, by the state itself. And we find the men being oppressed by the state because now they're being targeted by police. They're being targeted by the courts and the like. They can't get promising jobs. They don't even have promising educations. And so what happens is that we say, oh, it's just fornication, it's just 2 people having sex, it's not a big deal. But what you don't understand is that this is a metaphysical law that's being broken. And just like physical laws, when physical laws are broken, there are consequences. When metaphysical laws are broken, there are also consequences. And that's where evil comes in. Evil is the consequence of metaphysical laws being broken, or we can say even the breaking of metaphysical laws. And the nature of evil is that, like a pebble in a pond, it spreads out and it affects people that had nothing to do with it. It touches people that had nothing to do with it. And so from this, oh, it's just innocent. They're boyfriend and girlfriend. It's no big deal. Oh, so what? They had sex. It's not a problem. Oh, she had a baby. It's okay. She can raise it. This and that. What you don't understand is you're planting the seeds to destroy society. Yes, boyfriend and girlfriend is planting the seed to destroy society. You can disagree. Anybody can disagree with me, and it's fine. But this is what we witness. And so your disagreement is coming from a place, I'm not saying you are or anybody else is, but the disagreement is coming from a place of what they want to be the reality. But what we witness as the reality is what I just laid out. It's a cycle that goes on and on and on until it literally corrupts neighborhoods. It corrupts family. It breaks down families. And then it destroys communities. And then the whole society becomes weaker. Right? So how do you treat this? You treat this by instilling family values. How do you do that? By enforcing marriage, right? Marriage, and those that don't have, and this goes back to the punishment for fornication and adultery. If you're oppressing these children by having them illegitimately outside of wedlock, then you're literally corrupting society. You're planting the seeds that will destroy your society. And so marriage has to be the bedrock. Marriage has to be the turning point for our society. And if we want viable communities, if we want real viable communities that are really tasting and experiencing freedom, it has to start with strong families built upon the bedrock of marriage. And so I just wanted to, because when you wrote that, like, I forget again what it was exactly as the title, immediately I went into this in my mind that, it needs to be reminded the importance of marriage. And so I wanted to take a moment to do that.
Thank you for explaining. ho- well, I suppose the weakness of the West, it's everywhere now because the same assumptions prevail that extramarital sex between two consenting adults is perfectly fine. This is the liberal view.
Right. Because they don't, because they're materialists by nature, they don't believe in metaphysics, right? They don't accept metaphysics. And so they don't accept metaphysical laws, and they don't believe in the repercussions of those laws being broken, despite, again, we witnessing it in the world around us.
Yes, I mean, to the extent that the people who complain would be, well, the people from the, well, the lower status people whom the government doesn't care about, who complain about, well, immigration or high crime neighborhoods, and the government is indifferent because I think the ruling classes just don't care.
And I do want to stress this. It's not just the ruling classes. It's not just the government. Even the people don't care. So, for example, in the past, and perhaps when you were younger, you saw this, right? So I know cases like this, but it kind of went out of fashion in my youth. But if a girl became pregnant out of wedlock, what would happen is that suddenly she would go move away for a couple of years for school, and then when she came back, she would have a child, and it would be understood by the community that she got married and divorced while she was away. And so the fact that she committed fornication or adultery, fornication, the fact that she committed fornication and got pregnant would be hidden, right? It would be hidden by the family. There wouldn't be a big party celebrating her pregnancy. It wouldn't be,
She
congratulations
wouldn't be
and
allowed in school.
but my thing is, if it became public, right? But generally, what a family would do is hide this away. Some cases here in America, what would happen is that they would send this girl away, and somebody, she would bring the baby back and say, "I'm the baby's aunt. This is my niece," or her mom would raise it as her sister so that nobody would know. My point being is that that illegitimate child, the illegitimacy of that child, and the slight on the part of this girl being victimized most of the time, this would be hidden from other people to protect her honor, to protect the honor of the family, and to protect the society or the community. And so today, and this is what I was getting at, before they had this sensibility that this was a harm that needed to be corrected, or a wrong that needed to be righted, or hidden at least. So today, rather than do that, and I don't, it's not even the government, it's the people. You'll have baby showers. Yay, look at your baby, it's so beautiful. This baby has been oppressed. Your actions are wrong, you're bad. But they celebrate these things, right? And this is a problem in our society, is that we celebrate vice when in fact people, again, from the fundamental principles of the sharia, is that we are called to enjoin the good and forbid the evil, to tell people, no, this is wrong, why are you doing this? It's better to do this, right? And so this is our role. You asked about being a da'i yesterday. The fact is that the role of every single human being is to call to what is good and upright, and to be a barrier to protect people from what is harmful. And so today we find that turned upside down on its head. An interesting note. I'm sorry, I do want to talk about this for 1 minute, and then I'll stop. I talk too much, I know. But the thing here is that, the insanity in the Sharia is acknowledged. How do we know somebody is insane, or not mentally sound? It's when they cannot distinguish between benefit and harm. And the classic
That
example
would be
is,
our
if
ruling classes.
uh, uh, the classical example is, if you go to a child, and you have a $5 bill, and it's all crumbled up, and he has a $5 bill, and you have a nice shiny quarter, 25 cent, and you say, "I'll give you this beautiful shiny quarter if you give me that balled up piece of paper." Then somebody who doesn't know benefit from harm, they'll make that transaction, even though it's a huge loss for them. Now, the thing is, that's all of society now. All of society can't distinguish benefit from harm. They think that that which harms them is beneficial for them, and they think that which is good for them is a harm. If you call them to be upright, they think that you're oppressing them. If you ask them not to harm themselves, they think that you're taking something from them, that you're harming them. So it really, the ruling class shows it. It's spotlighted. It's actually in our faces. But the reality is that this is what we find in society, in Western society for the most part, and in my society for the most part, is we find people, the society itself has a level where they've lost their sanity. Meaning that they cannot distinguish benefit from harm any longer because the indoctrination that they've received. I'll give you just a classic example: dealing in interest. Student loans. Everybody wants to cancel student loans. The government should pay for student loans. And I don't care where a person falls on that spectrum of the argument. I personally believe, so I'll be clear, that if a person signs a contract incurring debt, then society is not liable to pay their debt. They are, right? And it's that simple. They signed it. They knew what they were doing, and so they now are responsible for that. That's neither here nor there. That's my position. But a more sound approach to this is to say, in the Quran, in fact, not just in the Quran, in all of the scriptures, interest, usury, is forbidden. So therefore, rather than canceling student debt, we're going to cancel all of the interest. And not just that, but we're going to stop the interest, right? So this is a fair balance, right? Now,
Mhm.
when you start talking about the harms of interest and how evil it is and how it needs to be stopped in this society, then people will say, "Oh no, you want to corrupt society. You want to take away the benefits of society. How are poor people going to do this and that?" And so they perceive this benefit, the end of usury, they perceive this removing the harm, right, as being something that's harmful because they can't even tell the benefit from the harm any longer. And
Yeah, I
so
mean, what about the loan sharks that we need to borrow money from? It's,
it's, and honestly, the loan sharks now are the banks.
yeah.
It's the reality is that every place that leases you anything, on loan, with interest, they're all loan sharks, and they'll all come at you. And so why do we think that the society is so poor, so impoverished? Our nation, the United States, is 20 some $1 trillion in debt, and it's a debt that we can never get out of. But what's funny is that the people don't understand that they are the collateral, and part of the way that they're the collateral is that they themselves are part of that debt system, right? And there's a whole nother conversation. But the point being here is that they people are drowning in debt. People are losing hope because of the debt. But it's not because they had a necessity. It's because they've been preyed upon by the we could say the usury industry, the credit industry.
Mhm. And the government doesn't protect them.
No, the government protects
The loan
the
sharks,
creditors. Exactly, exactly.
because the loan sharks bribe the government, I suppose.
Lobbyists, exactly. No,
Oh,
absolutely.
yes,
They
lobbyists.
don't call
I
it
use the
that,
wrong
right?
word.
But that's the reality. And for in many instances, I mean, we're getting a little bit off track, but in many instances, it's members of the government who are also bankers, and so it's self-serving in many of it's one and the same. There's an intertwining between the two, and so there's levels of corruption that are there that are visible, but nobody. And this is, I do want to take this back to religion for one moment and say, in Islam, we believe in a last day. We believe that eventually we're all going to stand before God for judgment, and there are signs telling us that we're moving towards the last day. So there are major signs and there are minor signs. And so what's the difference between these? The major signs are signs that nobody will be able to deny. So when the Antichrist comes, nobody's going to be able to say, "Oh no, this is a great guy and we all love him." They might say that, but the point is that we'll recognize this is the Antichrist. When the Messiah comes and destroys him, nobody will say, "No, no, that's not the Messiah." When Gog and Magog comes, nobody will say, "Oh no, that's just," nobody can explain these major signs away. And that's why they're major, because nobody can make excuses. Nobody can explain it away. It's in your face, right? I'll give you one example: the sun rising from the west. When that happens, nobody's going to try to philosophize about it. It's there, it's in your face, you recognize it, you know. But the minor signs are different. The minor signs are their technological advances, their societal changes, changes, deviations from what is normal, if you will. And so they happen, and when you point them out, when you start saying, look, this is from the signs of the last day, then people will say, oh, that's just how things are. You're blowing things. You take everything as a sign. No, this is from the signs because it was prophesied and now it's coming true. The minor signs are deviations from the normal course of things, which people excuse. They make excuses for. They overlook because it happens so slowly that they don't even realize it. It's like the frog in the pot. I think that's the analogy. The frog in the pot where you put it in before you turn the water on and it doesn't even realize it's being cooked. Whereas if the water was already boiling and you put it in, of course it would jump out because it knew what would be. What was, the same way with these signs is that they happen around us at a pace that we don't even pick up that it's happening. A clear example of this could be that boyfriend girlfriend dichotomy, where in the past a boy and a girl would never be alone together, and then
Mhm.
you had they would have a chaperone, and then after that it started being where Bobby and Julie, you know, the college quarterback and the cheerleader, they could go off to the movies alone together, and then now it's to where, you know, little kids walk up to each other, will you be my boyfriend, will you be my girlfriend, oh that's so cute. And now it progressed to the whole society doesn't even accept marriage as a sacred bond anymore. So it happened so slowly and gradually that people don't even realize how we got to where we are.
Mm.
And this is the
It was the
nature of
gateway sexual offence, wasn't it? Fornication was the gateway sexual offence at the time.
exactly. And one of the interesting things in the Quran itself is that God doesn't say don't fornicate. God doesn't say don't fornicate. He says don't draw near to fornication. Right? And this is a much stronger command because he's not saying to you don't just do the act. He's saying don't do those things that are going to take you on that pathway. So what I'm saying here is that this is the nature that the society has become so corrupt, but people don't even recognize it because it's been so gradual. We don't realize the normalization of deviance as it's happening.
Yes, yes. When do you think it began? The swinging 60s or before?
It definitely happened before that. And anytime we try to pinpoint one date, we can always go back to an older date, and not just that, but different. There's different signs. So different. One thing led into
Mm.
another, and like this. I think that World War Two, obviously World War One led into World War Two, but I think World War Two opened a doorway, especially in the Western world, for the corruption that came much later in the 60s. And what I mean by that is that, you know, men were off fighting and often dying in this horrible war, and the women were left at home to take care of not just the family but the economics of society. And so they were introduced to the workplace. And then when the laborers, when the corporations seeing that this was an added income, they didn't want to give up this labor base, and so they didn't want women to go back to being housewives. They encouraged them. They started the propaganda for women to be equals in the workplace. Of course, that's still to this day for the most part not true. They're not seen as equals in the workplace in the West anyway. So
Mm.
the fact is that it started with that the greed after or during World War II, where they saw this extra labor base. Well, we had one guy working out of the family, but now what if we could get both of them working and making profit for us, right?
Mhm.
And then with that, the property cost of living, the cost of living goes up, the cost of eating, housing, all of these things go up, and so now now families are forced to have two income homes. And where did it start? It started. I mean, of course, we can always point to an earlier date, but it started in mass with World War II, and it just progressed. So now women are in the workplace; they're being interacting with men who are strange, non-family members, you know, and so forth and so on. And so it's just a progression that you know society has declined since World War II. But of course, again, we can always point back to earlier dates.
And what you said about World War One leading to World War Two, those wars were un-Islamic, would you say? The First World War,
Absolutely.
anyway.
This is one of the most amazing things to me is that people still argue to this day, even though it's not true. It's absolutely not true. That they'll say more people have been killed in religious wars than any other war. Religious wars. This is why everybody kills everybody. I don't like religion because it leads to war. Well, the fact of the matter is the two most horrendous wars. Actually, we can say all of the most horrendous wars in the last 100 years were all secular in nature, all of them, and many of them were economic. Vietnam was economic, so forth and so forth. So we could point that Korea was economic. When you have the Russian or the USSR versus the USA Cold War, all of those wars that were fought, all of those countries that were used as pawns, all of those people that were killed for financial reasons, capitalism versus communism. And so the reality is that more people have died due to wars for non-religious reasons than any other reason. And the only two reasons I actually wrote a book, I have a textbook that I wrote on jihad. It outlines when is jihad lawful, how is it fought, all these things. But one of the things to understand is that jihad is only permissible for two reasons. One reason is defense, and one reason is when you go to protect an oppressed people, right? So if a people in this country is being oppressed, then it's permissible to go and stop their oppression. Not just Muslims, non-Muslims. So the Muslims used to be a force where if these non-Muslims, these Christians are being oppressed, the Muslims would come and protect them. This is why the golden age of Judaism is found in the Muslim lands. Moses, Maimonides, and other than him, these great Jewish thinkers are found mostly in the Muslim lands, because the Muslims protected the Jews from the Christians, from the Catholics specifically, during the Inquisition and other than that. So the Muslims have always been people who fought against oppression. I'm not saying, again, I said before and I'll say again, there's crazy everywhere. And so I'm not saying all of the Muslims, all the battles they fought were just or good or anything. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying, religiously speaking, we're only supposed to fight to defend ourselves or to end oppression. That's it. Right. And so the fact of the matter is that any war that's not there to do one of these two things is seen as un-Islamic.
Yes. And the Reformation, do you think the Reformation, I mean, I don't think they've succeeded in reforming their religion, have they? After 500 years, it's beyond reform.
They've changed their religion. They haven't reformed it. They changed it. And so reformation is a beautiful word. It makes it sound like it's nice, but literally they deformed their religion. And so, today, for example, you talk to a Christian. I'm sure it's the same in the UK, but I know for sure it's like this in the US. You go to somebody, they say they're Christian. You say, well, what do Christians believe? And they'll give you their answer. They don't have a creed. Like they don't have. I say, well, where did you get that from? They don't even know the Nicene Creed. They don't know anything about the Nicene Council. They don't know. I tried to talk intellectually to Christians to actually talk about the history of the Bible and where the Bible came from. They have no clue, none, because all they know is this deformed perversion of the remnants of Christianity that has watered its way down to them. And so this is the product of the deformation of Christianity. And so this is, they perhaps that initially it was something that strove to do good, but what we find ultimately is that, great harm was done to the Christian religion, and God knows best about that.
But I suppose the fact remains that the past three global empires have been Christian, and I guess European and American identity is believed to have been founded on Christianity.
Uh, you know, there's issues with that. First and foremost, I would say in the case of America specifically, there's that perception. I'm not going to say it's a reality because many of the founding fathers, again, were monotheists, and not only that were they monotheists, but they actually they didn't believe. They were materialists. Many of them were materialists, so they didn't believe in the miraculous nature of Jesus or the scripture or the like, and so they tried to take their code from their resource, their historical background, which was the Bible. But that doesn't make it necessarily Christian. And they even said that themselves, that this is not a Christian nation. That's one of the reasons America was formed, is so that it would be that it would have that religious freedom. But I agree with you, and this is the perception of many people. It is built upon that Christian background, that these Europeans who came here, they had this philosophical foundation. And in Europe, of course, the same thing. But at the end of the day, when we talk about governments like this, is it ever really about religion? We could talk about the Crusades. The first crusade was actually not, it was a religious war, of course, but was it because of religion? Was it because, somehow the Pope seen the Muslims as being, desecrating Jerusalem or something? No, it's because they was running out of money and they
Mhm.
needed a way to generate income. And so they used religious war. They used the crusade as a way to back themselves financially, support their government, get themselves more power. And so this is what we often find across the board, is that people will manipulate religion in order to get secular benefit, whether that be power, whether it be wealth, land grabs, all of these things. And so, though we say that they were Christian peoples, people who identified as Christians, I wouldn't necessarily claim that these nations were following Christianity. Now, I mean,
Well,
this is a nuance. It's a nuance,
mhm,
but sometimes it's good to mention this balance, just to be fair about the
mhm.
reality of. If you talk to a Christian, they'll say no, that wasn't Christian at all, and we have to agree with them on that.
Well, Christianity can only be defined by the Trinity. I mean, what else defines Christianity but the Trinity?
Well, this is that's a whole nother discussion, right? Because the fact, no, because you have monotheist Christians, you have Unitarians, you have Christians who
But they're
believe.
global homo. I mean, they're very liberal, aren't they? These Unitarian
Some of them
Christians.
are very strict, and that's one of the things that we have to understand, is that when the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, who was their number one enemy? Well, from their main enemies was the Arian Christians. And what was the Arian Christians? The Arian Christians was the Orthodoxy at that time. The Arian Christians were out of Africa, if I'm not mistaken. They were the seat of Christianity, and they were pure monotheists, right? And so when Rome adopted
The Aryans,
Christianity,
I'm sorry, but I thought the Aryans, well, the Aryans couldn't have been monotheists because they believed in the divinity of Jesus. And I
they
believe that Constantine and his son were both Aryans.
no,
Were they?
they actually, I could be mistaken. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've gone into these type of details, but they fought against Arius. The Arius wasn't invited to the Nicene Council. The many of the bishops who were Unitarian, who had the positions of authority in the church, weren't invited to the Nicene Council, because, and I could be mistaken about Arius and the Arians. I could be, but what I'm saying is that these what can we say, these leaders, and I'll use that word, these leaders amongst the Orthodox Church at that time, they're no longer Orthodoxy. They're now seen as sects and the like, because they lost. But they weren't invited to the Nicene Council. They were Unitarians. They believed that Jesus. I mean, they did believe that Jesus was sent and he died for their sins, but they did not believe that Jesus was a partner to God. They did not believe that Jesus was a part of the Trinity. They simply believed that Jesus was uh, uh, they believed, of course, that he's the Son of God, and we could get into that because that has its own connotations in Judaism, as well as in all societies, except the Christians have their own belief. But my point being here is that today, you're right. The Unitarians, for the most part, tend to be more liberal, but that's not how it started. And the original, the most original Christians, from what I gather, from my studies, from what I remember, most of them were Unitarians until, again, the Roman Empire entered into the scene and basically established their creed. My
Mhm.
point being in all of that is that, you know there are ways. Jehovah's Witnesses are Christians. I mean,
But
there's
the Aryans, aren't they? I mean, their beliefs are,
yes. So
it's
they
based on
believe that
Arianism.
Exactly. They believe that, Jesus is not God, meaning that he is not a demigod, that he is not but they believe that he is the son of God that was sacrificed, meaning, again, there's problems whenever we use the term son of God, but they believe that he was sent by God to be sacrificed for the sins of mankind. That's what, when it comes to Christianity, the one thing that's hard to get away from is the fact that they believe that they believe in the original sin, and they believe in the need for blood atonement for that sin, and so they believe in
Which
the
is
the
human
necessity.
sacrifice, which
Right.
is human
They believe
sacrifice
in that.
forbidden by the
And
Quran.
they well, it's also forbidden. Even Jesus said God is in need of repentance. He's not in need of sacrifice. This is found in the New Testament. And so,
Well, yeah, the story of Abraham is also a story against human sacrifice because that
absolutely,
whole idea about
absolutely.
Isaac.
And there's many examples of this. There's
Mhm.
many examples of this in the Bible itself. But my whole point here is that you can have Christianity without Trinity, but it's very hard to divorce any modern Christianity. It's very hard to divorce it from the original sin and the need for a blood sacrifice, which is something that we just simply, we as Muslims, we don't accept original sin
But I think
as such.
original sin was really a way for the priesthood to put its foot into your door because the story to frighten parents of infants is that if your baby dies, it's going to go, ooh, where's it going to go? Unless you have it baptized, it'll go to some nasty place and, that kind of thing.
It it also is a way to justify human nature. Well, we're all sinners. We're all born in this state. We
Mm,
can't help it. And the only way that you can atone for it is to follow us, believe in us, give us money, and the like. And so this becomes a problem. And in Islam, it's very simple. God forgives. It's that simple. God forgives. If you did something wrong, follow it up with the good. Ask God to forgive you, and do good. Make up for it. And it's that simple. God is all merciful. God is all
mm,
compassionate. God is forgiving. Turn to him and he'll turn to you. It's really that simple in Islam.
mm,
And that's not a justification. Oh, I killed somebody, God forgive me. No, you have to atone for that. You have to make up for that. And sometimes maybe even you forfeit your own life to make matters right. But the fact
mm,
is that God is forgiving. He doesn't need you to sacrifice this or that for him. He doesn't need anything. So.
mm. And Islam dispenses with the priesthood so that no one else but God gives you absolution. It's between you and God. It's not up to a priest who, may sprinkle holy water on you if you say that you believe that Jesus is God or the
No, so
last rites and that
there
kind of thing.
there is some misunderstanding, and so perhaps it's important to clarify this one point, and that is that uh, though there's no religious hierarchy, there's still respect for levels of scholarship. And so, for example, an imam, somebody who leads the prayer, has respect of those who follow him. A
Hmm.
scholar who teaches religion has respect, but they're not a pope, or they're not a bishop, or they don't have this sacred, or they have, I don't want to say they don't have a sacred, they don't have this ritual hierarchy that we find in other religions. But that doesn't deny the fact that there is authority in Islam. So, for example, we do have mayors, we do have governors, we do have presidents, and so my point being is that it's not a free for all at the same time.
There is still a hierarchy, yes.
Exactly.
I understand, but
But religiously speaking, nobody has the right to speak on behalf of God. Nobody is this. It. Nobody has the right to decree, "I have forgiven you, my child." Nobody can do that in Islam. Only God forgives. Only God forgives. Ultimately,
so this bargain between the priesthood and the Christian, it was immensely corrupting because this idea that you go to confession and you confess your sins, the priest gives you absolution, and you can start sinning again until next week, which
well,
maybe somehow some people think in terms
the
of.
problem with speaking about these matters is that I don't come from their faith. And so I'm going to give my perspective, and I might be insulting to somebody. They say, no, you're overlooking this. But what we will say is we know for fact from history that this whole ordeal was monetized, right? It was monetized. And so if you've done
Indulgences.
exactly, and so if you've done this, this sin is going to cost you this much to get absolved. And so we see the corruption. We see where the corruption came from. In
Mm.
Islam, we have repentance. And that's it. The only time that a person needs to, if we can use this word, confess our sins, is that if it's a matter of we betrayed the rights of somebody else. So I stole something. I have to go and say, hey man, I took this. I'm sorry. Here it is back. Right? Why?
Mm.
Because God forgives, but we also have to make things right between people. And so we have to establish justice. And so I'm not asking them to absolve my sin, but I'm asking them to forgive me as a human being. And so we have to understand that there's divine forgiveness, which is what we all want when we stand before God on the day of judgment, and then there's human forgiveness, where we've wronged somebody and we want them to forgive
Mm.
us for that. We want to normalize our relationships again.
Mm.
And again, I don't like to talk about other religions so much, only because uh, we all know that if somebody talks about Islam and I hear them and I say, no, look, he's misrepresenting us. Oh, he's coming from that, but he's completely ignoring this. And so the same way, I wouldn't want somebody doing that to Islam, speaking unjustly from their own background. I don't feel the right necessarily going into details about other religions
Well,
uh,
but it's,
for the
isn't
same
it?
reason.
I understand, but I mean, the Trinity is really quite clear. It does say that Jesus is to be considered equal status to God and the Holy Spirit. That is what is meant by the Trinity, which is ipso facto idolatry, I would have
See,
thought.
and here's the problem. I want to say first and foremost, in Islam, uh, Trinitarian beliefs would in fact be idolatry. That's first and foremost. Why? Because you're saying that God is three. You're praying to partners to God. You're establishing partners to God, and God is free of all partners. God is one. God is absolutely singular, perfectly singular. He doesn't need partners. There's no equals to God. There's no likeness to God. And so that's absolutely true. But the only thing that I want to say is that, when it comes to Trinity, Christians, and this is again the issue, Christians themselves disagree. So you have some who say God, and it's always interesting to me, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, because the Father and Son, my sons are not equal to me. We have a relationship. I am the Father and they are the sons. They are under my authority. They are under my responsibility. So to say the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all equal is really, it's neither here nor there. Anyway, the point being is that the fact of the matter is, some Christians will say that they're all one. Some will say no, that there's a hierarchy. Some of them will, and so different Christians have different interpretations. Even when we say Jesus is God, some Christians will say no, he's not God. The Father is God, but rather he's the Son of God. And so there's Christians today, for the most part, because they don't have that theological teaching anymore. They don't learn their religion anymore. They don't learn the creed. They don't learn the history of their
But
church. I know.
even if they did, it's clearly,
No,
well,
what
not
I'm saying is
allowed.
that what I wanted to say is that they differ because they don't know these things, that they differ. And so you can ask three Christians what it means to them to have the Trinity, and you'll get three different answers because, for the
Which
most part, if
because
they're
it's
not studied,
nonsense.
yeah, well, that's that's
And there is chapter 18, verse 4, that commands Muslims to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son. And I don't believe that any Muslim national leader ever did so formally.
Oh no, this there's many that condemn. So one of the things that we want to say here is that the clearest chapter regarding God, of course, is only 4 verses long, and most I'd say 90% of the Muslims around the world have it memorized in Arabic, and many people have heard it anyway, and that's Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. This is a very short chapter. It's the whole chapter. It's chapter 112 of the Quran. And in it, God says, say he is God, the one, right? That he is self-sufficient, that he begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is nothing like him. And in this, it establishes that God exists. that he is absolutely one without partner and equal, that he has absolutely no need whatsoever, and that he is the first and he is the last. How he is not begotten. There's no causative agent to God. He is the causative agent of everything else, nor is there an end to him. He does not beget, because things that beget do so because they're growing old, they're dying, and they're leaving, and so they leave something after them. God is forever. God is eternal. He's not going anywhere, so he begets not. And not just that, but there's nothing like him. How are you going to beget if there's no genus like your genus? So if there's no partner, no equal, nothing like God, then how is he going to have offspring? Rather, God is the creator of all things. And so in this very short verse, it uh, rebukes or rebuts, but rebukes the Trinity, the Trinitarian beliefs. And this is a fundamental belief of the Muslims, that God is absolutely one and there's nothing like him. So how can he have offspring? Rather, he is the creator of all things in the heavens and the earth, and all things belong to him.
And what would you say about America being the exceptional and indispensable nation for spreading Islam? Because this, I think, is really the beginning of it. If the First Amendment is based on Chapter 2, verse 256, then what liberals think of as liberal achievements actually belongs to the Quran.
Well, this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem because many people, the things that they espouse and say, well, we're fighting for this and we're fighting for that, and look at what we did, and we brought this into law. I actually, a lot of it, and we could list some of these things. I sit back and I say, yeah, Islam did this from the very inception. This is 1400 years old. It's not new, right? I was actually just about a month and a half ago, I was giving a talk to a group of non-Muslims, and a woman asked me, she said, well, what about women's suffrage and women's rights, and we're fighting for this and we got this done in America. And I said, this was already established 1400 years ago in Islam. This isn't new to Islam. You go to the Islamic lands historically and all of this stuff was established. It's new to you. It's not new to the Muslim world. And this is when we understand that the things that many Americans are asking for, it's already there, protected by the Sharia, but they don't know because it's never been introduced to them. They never heard of it. They hear about Islam through people who are enemies to Islam. They hear about Islam through the media. They hear about Islam through sensationalism. They don't actually hear the message of Islam. And so if we were able to actually convey the message of Islam to the people, this is why you find so many people entering Islam, because they're saying, most people, they say, this is already what I believe. This is already instinctual. I've always believed this. I just didn't know how to put it into words, or I didn't know that that's what Islam was, or I didn't know that there was something that, we could say a religion that said these things. But this was always what I believed anyway. And we find this
There is a
again and
White House
again.
Quran, isn't there? I mean, this is the thing about America, because there is a White House Quran. It belonged to Thomas Jefferson. It's still there,
Yeah, well,
and
the
he did
problem
read
with
it.
that, yeah, he did, and many of the presidents have read the Quran, and we can actually get into another subject matter of the Masons, and how the highest, most of the people in office are some form of Mason, some form or another of a Mason, and at the highest levels they study the Quran. They actually have to go through level after level to get to be able to study the Quran. While for Muslims, we simply are blessed to be able to pick it up. So my point being is that many of them study the Quran and they take Quranic principles to govern, but they don't publicize that. So it's there. The one thing is, when we bring up the Jeffersonian Quran, the defense against that, the rebuttal against that is that that's because he was fighting Muslim pirates off the Moroccan coast and the like, and so he had to know his enemy. That's the claim that's made. But the problem with that claim is that many presidents since him have continued to read the Quran and benefited from the Quran. Not to mention that the very first treaty that America ever signed, the first country to ever recognize America as an independent nation, was Morocco. They're our first ally. They're our oldest ally. The Muslims were the first people to accept accept America as an independent nation. And these things are often forgotten in our society, unfortunately.
Hmm. And I think there is a phrase in the Supreme Court of the United States that has Muhammad in it. I don't
It's
know.
been taken down. It's been taken
Has
down.
been taken down.
It
Well,
has, because we don't have images in Islam. We don't believe in graven images. And so what happened is that our description of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, has been perfectly preserved for 1400 years through prophetic narrations, a sound chain of narrations, so that we can verify it, so that we can authenticate these things. And so in writing, we know that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was not too tall, nor was he too short, but he was of medium stature. We know all of these descriptions. I can tell you about his feet. I can tell you about his body hair. I can tell you about his teeth. I can tell you all of these details about the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And we have all of that preserved in writing
mhm,
in many books. Now, what happened is that they took that written description, which the Muslims have always relied upon, and many of us, I myself, it's actually right in front of me on the wall. There's something called the Hilya, which is the writing of the description of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in an artistic way. And the Hilya is a very prominent piece of Islamic art, and it was traditionally found in many Muslim homes. Now, what they did is that they took that, and they took an artist who does sketch artists for
mhm.
criminals, and and he went through and he drew what he read, and so he said this is what he must have looked like. And
How do you spell this Hillier thing? So I.
Hilya, Hilya, Hilya.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
You can find it online. It's a very popular thing. So my thing here is that the sketch artist, he did his best, but in Islam we reject these things. We don't have graven images. We don't put up portraits of people
Mhm,
in a form of lauding them. And even the Prophet Muhammad, we don't worship the Prophet Muhammad. We only worship God. And so we don't have images of the Prophet. You won't find any prophet, any Muslim having an image that's supposed to be the Prophet, any of the prophets, because this
mhm.
isn't something that we do.
When was it taken down?
I believe that it was taken down approximately 20 or 25 years ago, but I could be mistaken. This last decade is kind of blurred together. but
Hmm.
um, but yeah, it hasn't been. I believe that it's only been about 20, 25 years, something like this. The Muslims petitioned to get it taken down. Some people were like, "Look, we even have this up in and the Muslims was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, no, we don't want that." So yeah, we had it taken down. The large group, the nation of Muslims, but not, so it's no longer there from what I understand.
Hmm. Hmm.
It may have been replaced with something else like the Hilya. I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm. Okay, I'll look it up. I mean, the reports I found online were that it's still up there, but I'll certainly check again. But do you think the problem with the West is that it has a religion that no longer works? I mean, if you think of all the convulsions of the West.
No, I don't think that at all. I actually think that the problem with the West is that we've been indoctrinated, and we, meaning everybody who lives and goes to school in the West, has suffered on one level or another of this indoctrination, and that is that we're indoctrinated with materialism. And I don't mean here love for material things. Like, that's not what I mean. What I mean is this scientism, dogmatic scientism. If it can't be proven via science, touch, taste, sound, measure, weigh, if we can't get to it that way, then it's not real. And everything that is not answerable by science is not true. And anything that is not true is irrational. And so this is the indoctrination that we receive. And so now religion, you have several generations of people who are taught in school, and then in their homes it's reinforced via television, movies, music, all of these things, that religion is backwards, religion is the cause of evil, religion is the cause of war, religion is oppressive, religion is manipulated by man, not the government. Religion is manipulated by man. Religion is mythology, religion is all of these bad things. All you can rely upon is science. And so now you have people who they walk away they see religion as a social, a way of socializing. right? Religion is there just for socialization and communal norms, but it's not real, right? This is how people approach religions today in the West. And so you have people going to church, but they don't believe it. You have a conversation with them and they'll say, I don't believe that, but this is what our family does. And so
Mhm.
what happens is that this indoctrination of scientism, dogmatic materialism, what this has done is that it's destroyed the faith in the people's hearts. And because they no longer have faith in their hearts, they don't apply their religion. The problem is people have walked away from even the people who go to church, they've walked away from their faith. And so they don't live their faith. People will swear that they're Christians and then watch sex on television. And I don't even mean sex like X-rated stuff. I'm talking about, fornication and adultery. They'll watch a movie such as The Italian Job, and they'll be cheering on thieves, and they'll be rooting for the thieves. And they think that, oh, I've been entertained for 2 hours rooting for these thieves. But they're supposed to be Christians who are against theft, right? And so this is the thing, is that we claim that we're religious people, but then we envelop ourselves with irreligious behaviors or irreligious sound music, irreligious entertainment, and all of these things. And so it's not that the religion has failed the people have walked away from the religion. Now I do want to say, I don't believe that Christianity is a viable solution. And the reason that I say that is because Christianity is all about faith and good manners, but it has no rules. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? And so it's still reliant upon, it doesn't have internal rules to itself. It relies upon the government. Whatever government you find yourself in, be obedient to that government, even if they're oppressive. This is so
Mhm.
it only has a sound, viable system of life has to, we live in a four-dimensional world. We have to have four dimensions. That is height, width, depth, and time, right? Three spatial dimensions, one temporal dimension. If you don't have four dimensions to your life, then you're disempowered. And if you only have two dimensions in your life, then the reality is that you're imbalanced and you're diseased, right? You're diseased. And the fact is that that's the case with many religions. And so what this means is that you have to have an aspect of faith, right? And this is height, everything between the heavens and the earth. I believe in this. I believe in God. I believe in revealed scriptures. I believe in the prophets. I believe in the last day. So this faith, right? And then that's the height. And then you have width. The width is the rules and the regulations, right? So the boundaries. And this is where Christianity falters, right? So Christianity falters because it doesn't have these boundaries. Follow Caesar, do whatever the government says, just live under the laws of the land and be happy with whatever they tell you, right? So it's missing this component. So automatically it's missing one component. And then the other thing is spirituality. There has to be an aspect of spirituality. And this is honestly, this is where Judaism falls short, because and I know they have the Kabbalah system. I know about these things. But my point being is that most of Judaism, 80%, maybe 90% of Judaism, is the laws, the laws, the laws. It's a very legalistic religion. And so the fact of the matter is that they're negligent, or they neglect spirituality. Where Christianity is a spiritual religion that neglects the law, Judaism is a legalistic religion that neglects spirituality. And then the final dimension of the hour, we're all headed towards the last day. And so what happens is, in Christianity, you find an imbalance towards the spiritual, neglecting the rules and regulations. In Judaism, you find the rules and regulations, but you find a imbalance towards the spiritual. In Islam, there's a harmony between all of this. There's a harmony, there's a balance, so that we can have a complete way of life. Now, the problem, going back to what I was saying, is that the problem in this society is that we find that the religions are imbalanced, right? There's no balance. And so how can they sustain the society? How can they support the society when they're imbalanced themselves? And so they disempower the people. And so there's a dis-ease that occurs from this. And so again, going back to the very beginning, the only real solution is being governed by the sharia, so that people can taste freedom, so that they can have holistic, balanced, harmonious lives.
Mhm. Yes, I think for Christianity, they have a defective scripture. I mean, it should be obvious, really, that scripture coming from God must trump over scripture that is supposed to be from some guys called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul.
Or Paul, yeah, or James. Even though James is actually my favorite book of the Bible, but you know, all of these letters, and we have no chain of custody, right? We have no chain of custody, so we can't verify that any of these guys are in fact the authors. And it's more than that. Not one of them claimed revelation. These are books. Bible means little library, right? It comes from the Greek word biblio, which means, you know, library. So Bible means small library, and the standard is about, I think, 66 books, or, you know, 60 some books is the standard. And the you have the Old Testament, the New Testament. We could break them down into different. We could break them down into, you know, for example, the Tanakh, you know, all of the. We could do that, but the point being here is that we have these books that are just compiled together by man, written
Hmm.
by man. Many of them don't claim revelation. Many of them claim that this is the writing of man, and, you know, the epistles are nothing more than letters to churches from a man to a group of men. And so to claim divinity for them is not something that these books even claim for themselves. And so we have to be aware of that. And one of the beauties of the Quran is that, you know, if this was from other than God, you would find therein many contradictions. The word used for contradictions in that verse of the Quran, it's only used that one time. You can't even find that word a second time, saying that not only are there no contradictions, you're not even going to find this word a second time. And so the fact is that any book that claims to be divine has to be free of any kind of contradictions. It has to have support. It has to have evidence. And sadly, unfortunately, the Bible doesn't have that. And really, again, even taking it out of that dimension, and again looking at it as pure, it is the work of man. It's compiled by man. Many of us, we read the Bible and somehow we think that this English is the original language. We don't realize that the English is, you know, watered down translations over time. So it went from Aramaic to Greek to Latin to English, and then from Latin back to Greek and Hebrew. But originally, you're not even going to find the original Greek, except that it's copied from the Latin. So even, and anytime you have a translation of anything, it's actually not a verbatim translation. No matter how true the translator is trying to be, it's going to be his commentary, what he understood from it, not
Yes.
necessarily what the original says. And so what we're dealing with is literally 4 layers of watered down commentary of what was originally said, and we don't realize it. So the Bible itself is a book that we have to put it in perspective, historical perspective, rather than just say, no, it's the word of God and you have to accept it as such. No, we have to examine it and find this claim. Is this claim accurate? Does the book itself claim to be from God? No, it does not. And so this is where we have to go with these types of discussions.
Yes.
I see it's getting late, so I do want to say one last thing, because I touched on this a couple times, and you know, I think that perhaps it'll go right in line, and it's a good place to close, because even though we are talking about Sharia, even though we are talking about, you know, secular Quranism, if you will, then I still come from a faith-based background, and so when we talk about the Day of Judgment in Islam, I want to leave people with a clear understanding of it, or perhaps a clear understanding of this. And that is that, you know, mankind has been entrusted. We weren't given, we were entrusted with free agency. Right? And so this is a trust upon us from God. And we are accountable for it. You know, we have to answer for that. And so what we are accountable for is the choices that we make and why we make them. So not the actions, because sometimes the actions belie us, but the choices that we make and our intentions behind those choices. And so on the Day of Judgment, we will be taken into account for our choices. That's what we have, free agency, so that we can make choices. We have our intellect, our rational mind, so that we can make judgments, so that we can weigh things, so that our choices are sound. It's because we're accountable for them. Now, when we're taken into account on the Day of Judgment, there's only two outcomes. There's only two outcomes. There's not a third outcome. And those two outcomes, both of them are similar, meaning by that both of them, you will, whether you succeed or you fail on that day, right? And I'll use those words very loosely. Whether you succeed or you fail on that day, you will experience God. You will experience from the attributes of God, and you will spend the rest of eternity worshiping God, right? That's what we believe. So If you succeed on that day, right, then what happens is that, and let me actually start the other way, because I don't want to take people to the good and then go to the bad. I'll start with the bad and go to the good. So if a person fails on that day, what that means is that you enjoyed the beauty of God in this life, and you refused, you rejected, you rebelled against his majesty in this life. You did not choose to align yourself with his guidance, right? And so in doing that, you've earned something for yourself. And what is it that you earned? You earned God's justice. You're never going to be oppressed. You're only going to get what you deserve, right? You're only going to get what you yourself earned. And so you're going to experience the justice of God on that day. And what that ends up being is that you're going to worship God, right, for the rest of eternity, crying out to him, crying to him, begging him for forgiveness, begging for release from the fire of hell. When all you had to do, right? There's a prophetic narration where a man was asked, it said that a man in the fire of hell said, if you had the entire world and seven like it, would you give that to ransom yourself from the fire of hell? And the person in the fire says, yes, of course. And it said to him, you didn't have to do any of that. All you had to do is be obedient to God in this life. Right? And you chose not to. So you expose yourself to the justice of God, and now you'll spend eternity worshiping God, repenting, crying out to him, praying to him for his mercy, and the fire of hell. So this is loss. And then the other side of that is that you saw the beauty of God and you enjoyed it, but you also recognized his majesty and you lived according to his majesty under his guidance. And in that particular side, then you've exposed yourself to the grace, the mercy, the compassion, the kindness, the love of God. And so he enters you into the gardens of bliss. And there you will worship him for eternity, praising him, glorifying him, thanking him for his bounty upon you. And so the reality is that it's all about our choices. We can choose to expose ourselves to the justice of God, or we can choose to expose ourselves to the mercy and grace of God. And ultimately, that's the reckoning on the day of judgment. And there either you will experience his justice or you will experience his mercy. There's no third.
Wow. Well, thank you for making it all fit together so nicely.
No problem.
It's yeah. I've enjoyed it very much and learned quite a lot. I must thank you for the refreshing way that you have put everything together.
No, I thank you for inviting me on again. And again, yesterday it was kind of haphazard. You know, it happened spontaneously. I wasn't expecting it, so I felt very scattered. But I knew, you know, because of your call to secular Quranism, I know that I wanted to make clear what the Sharia was. And so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that for you and your audience as well.
Thank you, and I hope we will be able to speak again on other important matters to do with Islam.
I'm at your disposal, God willing, as much as I'm able.
Thank you very much,
No problem. Have a good day, and I look forward to talking again.
and the same. Thank you.
No problem. Sultan.